Hey, old-timer, I'm talking to you. Settle a bet for us. What was your rank? You even had one, or did they just hand you a mop and point you at the latrine? The voice belonged to Corporal Jace Renner, 22 years old, and it carried across the dining facility the way a young man's voice does when he wants a crowd to hear it. He stood with his weight cocked back on one heel, his camis pressed, his fresh chevrons sharp on the collar, two of his friends grinning behind him. It was family day on the base, and the mess hall was loud with the ordinary noise of it. Trays sliding, children laughing, the long steel serving line steaming under the lights, the smell of coffee and floor wax and overcooked eggs. People came and went around the long tables in jeans and unit t-shirts and Sunday clothes. Somewhere, a baby cried and was hushed. At the end of the farthest table, alone, sat an old man. He did not look up. He was thin in the way that very old men get thin, the flesh gone from the back of his hands so that the tendons stood like cord. He wore a worn olive field jacket, an M65 with the collar gone soft from years, over a plain chambray shirt. A faded ball cap sat on the table by his elbow. Both of his hands were folded around a paper cup of coffee that had long since stopped steaming, and he held them there, perfectly still, the way a man holds something he has decided not to put down. His face was a landscape of deep lines, weathered brown, and his eyes were the pale gray of river ice. He looked, to a young man hunting for a laugh, like exactly the kind of forgotten old relative who wandered into the wrong room on family day and could not find his way back out. Renner leaned down into his space. I said, "What was your rank?" "Come on, Pop. You're sitting in a Marine Corps mess hall. Show some respect. Stand up when somebody asks you a question." The old man turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. He did not stand. He did not flinch. He did not give Renner the small, frightened recalibration that a bully feeds on. The flinch, the stammer, the eyes dropping. He simply sat with the stillness of a statue carved from weathered granite, as if the noise of the room and the boy bent over him were weather, and weather was something he had learned a long time ago to wait out. "He's deaf," said one of the friends, a lance corporal named Pratt. "Look at him. Lights are on. Nobody's home." "Nah, he hears me." Renner straightened, played to them. "He's just slow." "Right, Pop? You eat here a lot. They let anybody in on family day, I guess." Across the dining facility, near the coffee urns, a different man had gone quiet. Sergeant Major Marcus Doyle was 49 years old and had spent 28 of those years in the Marine Corps. And a sergeant major learns to read a room the way a sailor reads weather, by 100 small signs at once. He had been only half listening to a captain beside him, nodding at something about the afternoon schedule, when the old man's stillness reached across 40 feet of noise and took hold of him. It was wrong. It was the wrong kind of stillness for a frightened old civilian. A frightened old man fidgets, looks for the door, looks for help. This man looked for nothing. He sat the way men sit who have been shot at and have decided, somewhere in the marrow, that there is very little left in a room that can be done to them. Doyle had spent the better part of 3 decades learning the difference between men who had seen the elephant and men who only talked about it. And the lesson had cost him friends, and it lived in his body now, below the level of thought. The talkers filled silences. The talkers told you their war in the first 10 minutes, unprompted. The medals and the close calls and the things they could not tell you, but would anyway. The other kind, the kind who had actually been to the bottom of it and come back up. Those men were quiet in a particular way, a way that had nothing to do with shyness. They were quiet the way a deep river is quiet. They had nothing to prove because the only people whose opinion they cared about were dead. And the dead are a hard crowd to perform for. Doyle had met perhaps a dozen of them in his life, He could pick them out of a crowd now from across a parade deck, and the old man at the end of the farthest table was setting off every instinct he had. Doyle set down his coffee. He did not pick it back up. He watched the corporal lean in again, watched the two lance corporals arrange themselves to laugh, and he felt the first cold finger of certainty crawl up the back of his neck. The sense, not yet a thought, that the loudest man in the room was standing over the most dangerous one and didn't know it. The captain was still talking. Doyle was no longer hearing him. His eyes had gone to the old man's hands, folded around the cup, and to the small, dull thing pinned to the lapel of the field jacket that he could not quite make out from here. A little rosette gone soft and tarnished with age. He thought of his first sergeant major, 30 years gone now, a Korea man who had told a 19-year-old Doyle a single thing he had never forgotten. The most dangerous man in any room, son, is almost always the quietest one, and the second most dangerous is the loud one who hasn't figured that out yet. Doyle had laughed at the time. He was not laughing now. He was watching a loud young corporal lean over the quietest man Doyle had seen in years, and the old arithmetic was running itself in the back of his skull, and it was coming up wrong and getting worse. "Sergeant Major," the captain said. "You with me?" "Give me a minute," Doyle said, and started, slowly, to move. The thing about a man like Jace Renner is that silence is a vacuum he is compelled to fill, and the old man's silence was the largest vacuum in the room. So Renner kept talking, because not talking would have meant admitting that the joke had not landed, and the lance corporals were watching, and a Marine does not let a joke die in front of the men he is trying to impress. "Family day, huh?" Renner said, pulling out the bench across from the old man and dropping onto it uninvited, sprawling his arms across the table. "My grandpa was Navy. Spent the whole war on a desk in San Diego. Real war hero." Pratt laughed. "That you, Pop? You a desk guy. Supply, cooks. No shame in it. Somebody's got to peel the potatoes." The old man looked at him then, just once, a slow lift of the pale eyes, and said in a voice like gravel poured slow from a bucket, "Third Force." Renner blinked. "What?" "You asked what I was. Third Force Reconnaissance Company." The old man's gaze went back to his coffee. "You wear the spearhead on your shoulder, son, and you don't know your own lineage. That's a shame. Somebody failed you." For half a second, Renner's grin slipped, because the old man had said it without heat, the way a man states the time, and because the words, Force Reconnaissance, had landed somewhere in the back of his training, where he knew, dimly, that they were supposed to mean something. Then he recovered, because recovering was what he did. "Force Recon. Sure you were. You and every barfly with a ball cap. My uncle's got the same hat. Vietnam veteran. Bought it at a gas station." But Sergeant Major Doyle, who had crossed half the distance now and stopped a few tables away to watch, had heard the old man say, "Third Force," and had seen the small correction land, and felt the cold finger on his neck become a full cold hand. The lineage was right. The phrasing was right. The clipped, exact, unshowy way. Real operators name their units. No embellishment, no story, just the designation. The way you'd give a serial number. Doyle had met a great many men who claimed things in mess halls and bars. The men who had actually done the work almost never volunteered it, and when they did name it, they named it like that. Flat. Tired. True. The old man had not raised his voice, and he had not raised his eyes again, and that was the thing that finished it for Doyle. A fraud, caught out on his lineage, gets loud or gets gone. He doubles down or he shrinks. A fraud explains. This man had corrected the boy the way a teacher corrects a child's arithmetic, without investment, almost with regret, and then let it go, because being right about the designation of his own unit was not a thing he needed the corporal to concede. He had earned that designation in a place the corporal could not find on a map, and the boy's belief or disbelief weighed exactly nothing against it. Doyle had heard senior officers reach for that tone and miss it. You could not fake the indifference. The indifference was the proof. Doyle moved another table closer, and now he could see the lapel. It was a rosette. Small, round, a faded powder blue, the kind of blue that does not occur anywhere in the natural world and occurs in exactly one place in the United States Marine Corps. The fabric of it had gone soft and pale, with decades of handling, the way a thing goes when it is touched often and worn quietly, not displayed. Doyle's mouth went dry. He had seen that blue exactly twice in his career, both times on living men, both times in rooms where general officers had stood at attention and held it. He turned, found a young corporal he knew by the coffee line, a runner for the headquarters element, and said very quietly, in the voice sergeants major use that travels no further than the man it is aimed at, "Go find the commanding general's aide, right now. Walk fast, don't run. Tell him Sergeant Major Doyle needs the general in the dining facility. Go." The runner saw his face and went. At the table, Renner was still talking, still grinning, still building his little monument of contempt one brick at a time, with no idea at all that the room had begun, very slightly, to tilt beneath him. Pratt and the other lance corporal, Soul, drifted in to stand at Renner's shoulders, drawn the way young men are drawn to the warmth of someone else's cruelty when they have decided it is safe. Sowell had his phone out now, held low, the lens pointed across the table. "Get his good side," Pratt said, and snorted. "What do we call him?" Renner mused, leaning back, performing now for the lens as much as the men. "Chow Hall Grandpa, that's it. Hey, Chow Hall Grandpa, smile for the boys back home." He reached out and rapped his knuckles twice on the table, hard, right beside the old man's folded hands, the way you'd knock to wake a sleeping dog. "Anybody home in there? Blink twice if they're feeding you all right." The old man did not blink twice. He kept both hands flat and still on the table, and he let the laughter come, and the small, cruel ceremony of it went on around him, and he absorbed it, the way old stone absorbs rain. A few of the families nearby had gone quiet, and were looking, the way people look when they are uncomfortable and have not yet decided whether it is their business. A mother gathered her 2 children and steered them toward the door. A staff sergeant by the window watched for a long moment, jaw working, then looked down at his tray because the corporal was loud and the old man was nobody, and it was family day, and nobody wanted to be the one to make a scene. That is the quiet arithmetic of these things. A room will tolerate a great deal of cruelty if the cruelty is confident and the victim is silent, because confidence looks like permission and silence looks like consent, and most people would rather eat their eggs than test either. And the old man understood the arithmetic better than anyone in the room because he had spent his life among young men, had been one of the loudest of them once, and had buried more of them than he could stand to count. He was not enduring the corporal out of weakness. He was enduring him the way you endure a thunderstorm or a green lieutenant, as a thing that would pass, that did not know any better, that was not worth the cost of breaking. He had broken men with his hands. He knew exactly what it took and exactly what it left behind, in them and in him. And he had decided a long time ago that he would spend the rest of his years not doing it unless there was no other road. A loud boy in a warm mess hall on family day was not no other road. So he kept his hands flat on the table and let the noise come. And he thought, distantly, the way the old think about the young, that he hoped somebody loved this one, and that the boy would live long enough to be ashamed of this, because being ashamed of it would mean he had grown into someone better. And that was the most an old man could wish for a foolish young one. If you have ever sat in a room and watched the young forget what the old once carried, and said nothing because it was not your place. Then stay with this one to the end. And subscribe to the Veteran Vault, so the next forgotten man finds the people who'll remember him. Renner was enjoying himself now. Tell you what, Pop, I'll make it easy. We'll do ranks. I'll go slow. He held up a finger for each one, sing-song, like a drill instructor mocking a recruit. Private. PFC. Lance Corporal. That's these two clowns. Corporal. That's me. You getting this? Where'd you top out? You make PFC before they figured out you couldn't hack it? And the old man lifted his eyes. He did it slowly, without drama, the way a door swings on a heavy hinge, and he looked directly at Pratt. Not Renner, but Pratt, the one with the loudest laugh, and held him there with the pale gray ice of his gaze, and said nothing at all. Pratt stopped laughing. He could not have told anyone why. There was nothing in the old man's face but calm, no threat, no anger, nothing a camera would catch. But Pratt felt something move through him like cold water down a collar, some animal recognition older than rank or uniform, the sense of having been looked at, briefly, by something that did not need to raise its voice to be the most serious thing in the room. He took a half-step back and bumped the table behind him and laughed again, too loud, and it came out wrong, and he hated that it came out wrong. Man, whatever, Pratt muttered. He's just creepy. A small girl, maybe 6, in a dress with a Marine Corps emblem stitched on the pocket, had stopped near the end of the table with a juice box forgotten in her hand. She was looking at the old man with the frank, unguarded attention that children give to things adults have agreed to ignore. The old man's eyes shifted to her, and something in his face changed. Not a smile. He did not smile, but a softening at the corners, the way a hard winter field softens for an hour at noon. He gave her the smallest nod, grave and courtly, one serious person acknowledging another. The girl considered this, and then nodded back exactly as gravely, and some part of the dignity that the corporal had been trying for 10 minutes to strip away from the old man was quietly handed back to him by a 6-year-old who did not know she was doing it. Her mother appeared and drew her off toward the doors with an apologetic glance that took in the whole scene and decided, like the others, that it was not her place. The juice box stayed where the girl had set it on the corner of the table, a small, bright thing, and the old man looked at it for a moment and then looked back out the window. Renner glanced at his friend, annoyed at the crack in the performance, and turned back to the old man to fix it. "Stand up," Renner said. The performance had curdled into something harder now, the way it does when a young man feels the crowd's attention start to slide and reaches for force to hold it. You're in a Marine Corps mess hall on Family Day, and when somebody talks to you, you stand up. That's basic. You'd know that if you ever served a day in your life. So stand up. He reached across the table and shoved the old man's tray, a half-eaten roll, the paper cup, hard, so it skidded and the coffee slopped over the lip and ran across the steel in a thin brown sheet toward the old man's folded hands. The old man's right hand moved. It was not fast in the way that draws an eye, but it was complete. One economical, unhurried motion that took the paper cup at the exact instant before the coffee reached it, righted it, set it down a hand's width to the left, out of the path of the spill, and returned to fold over his other hand. There was no fumble in it. There was no tremor. It was the movement of a man whose hands had been trained, decades ago, to do precise things under pressure and had never entirely forgotten, the way a pianist's fingers find a chord in the dark. The coffee ran harmlessly past where the cup had been and dripped off the edge of the table onto the floor. Sergeant Major Doyle, 3 feet away now, saw that hand move and felt the last of his doubt go out of him like air from a tire. He had watched a lot of hands in his life, on rifles, on radios, on the shoulders of men who were not going to make it. You could not teach what he had just seen. You could teach a man to be fast, and you could teach a man to be smooth, but the thing that put that hand on that cup at that exact instant was not speed or smoothness. It was a nervous system that had been rebuilt, once, a long time ago, by months and years of doing precise work while the world came apart, until the hands learned to operate a half-second ahead of the panic and never gave the time back. Doyle's own hands had a little of it, not like that. He had never had it like that. There were maybe a few hundred men alive in the country who had it like that, and most of them, he knew, had names you would recognize from a wall. You never served, Renner was saying, louder, because the shove had not produced the flinch either, and a frightened thing was supposed to flinch. That's the truth, isn't it? You sit here in your gas station jacket with your little... What is that, a pin? You buy that? You stole that. You're sitting in our house wearing something you didn't earn, and that's the lowest thing there is. You understand me? That's stolen valor. There are men who'd put you on the ground for that. A few people gasped. The staff sergeant by the window stood up. The old man looked at the spilled coffee running off the edge of the table, and then he looked at Renner, and for the first time he spoke more than 3 words at a stretch, in that slow gravel voice, without any anger in it at all, which was somehow worse than anger. I knew men who would have stood up for you, he said. Knew a few who did. They were about your age. They don't get to be old and rude in a warm room, son. I think about that most days. He paused. Sit down before you say a thing you'll carry. It was not a threat. It was something closer to mercy, offered plainly, and it landed in the silence like a stone dropped in a well, and even Renner felt the strangeness of it, the way the old man had turned the whole thing sideways. For a second, he had nothing. Then Sergeant Major Doyle stepped between them. Corporal. Doyle did not say it loudly. He did not have to. There is a register that senior enlisted Marines can find, low and flat, and absolutely without question in it. And Doyle found it now. Step back from that table, hands at your sides. You will not say one more word until I tell you to. Renner straightened on reflex. The body obeys a sergeant major before the mind catches up. But the grin was still half on his face, and the lances were still watching. And so the part of him that could not stand to lose in front of them made him say, Sergeant Major, this guy's faking. He's got a fake pin. I'm just defending the... You have no idea, Doyle said very quietly, who you were talking to. Something in the way he said it reached even Renner. The sergeant major was not looking at him. Doyle was looking at the old man, and his face, the hard-weathered face of a man with 28 years in, had arranged itself into something the corporal had never once seen on a sergeant major and could not name, because he had no experience to name it with. It was the face of a man standing in the presence of something he had been taught to revere, before he ever earned the right to wear the uniform himself. Doyle's eyes had gone to the rosette on the lapel and stayed there. Sergeant Major, Renner tried. Smaller now. It's just an old... That blue, Doyle said. To no one, to the room, to himself. Do you know what that blue is, Corporal? Have they taught you anything? He turned, finally, and looked at Renner, and the look emptied the last of the blood from the young man's face. There is exactly one ribbon in this country that color. One. And a man does not buy it at a gas station, because there is no amount of money on this earth that purchases it. It is given by the Congress of the United States, and most of the men who earn it dead. You see them on the news, Doyle went on, and he was not really talking to Renner anymore. He was talking to the whole silent corner of the room, the way a man talks when something too large for one listener is moving through him. Once a year, maybe, an old man at a ball game, and they put a flag up on the screen, and 40,000 people stand and cheer for 90 seconds, and then they sit down and forget him before the next pitch. That's the only time most people ever see this. He gestured, just barely, at the small, tarnished rosette. They never think about the other 364 days, the grocery store, the waiting room, the bus, a man wearing the highest thing this country can give, standing in line for a sandwich, and nobody knows, and he likes it that way, because the ones who'd have understood it are gone. His voice dropped. And every so often, some kid who's never missed a meal or a night's sleep decides that quiet old man is a joke. And the kid finds out. They always find out. The dining facility had gone quiet now in a widening ring, conversation falling away table by table, as people felt the change in the air without understanding it. What the boy in the pressed camis did not yet know, what was about to walk through the doors of that mess hall and change the shape of the rest of his life, is the kind of thing a man should learn standing up. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault so you don't miss the moment it lands. Doyle keyed the small radio clipped at his shoulder, his eyes never leaving the old man, and said 2 words into it. Low. Stand by. Then, to the corporal, without turning. You're going to want to remember exactly where you're standing. Don't move. The old man was not in the mess hall anymore. He was 24 years old, and the year was 1969, and the jungle was the green-black dark of 3 in the morning, and the rain had been falling for 2 days, so that the world was only water and the sound of water. There were 6 of them on the patrol, a team that had gone in light and quiet across the river to find something the maps could not, and had found instead a great deal more of the enemy than anyone at the firebase had believed was there. The first burst had taken Hollis in the throat before any of them heard it. After that, there was no quiet left in the world. He remembered it, not as a story, but as a series of weights. The weight of Delgado across his shoulders, both of the kid's legs gone useless below the knee, the wet heat of him, the way he kept apologizing. Sorry, Sergeant. Sorry. I can walk. Put me down. When he could not walk. The weight of the radio, the weight of the rifle he would not leave, the weight of the decision, made in a half-second behind a fallen tree, with rounds chewing the bark to powder over his head, that he would not leave a single one of them in that valley, not the living and not the dead, and that he would either bring them all to the river or he would stay there with them. It took 3 days. 3 days of moving at night and lying still in the green murk by day, with his hand pressed flat against Delgado's chest to feel that it still rose and fell. 3 days of carrying and dragging and going back, of laying covering fire and counting rounds, and rationing them like a miser, of the radio crackling and going dead and crackling again. He brought 4 men out alive. He brought 1 man out who did not survive the river, and 1 man, Hollis, the first one, the one the burst had taken in the dark, he could not reach, and the choice to leave him was the heaviest weight of all, heavier than any living man he carried, and he had carried it every day since for 57 years. The second night was the one he came back to, when he came back to any of it. The rain had stopped, and the moon had come through the canopy in broken silver coins, and they had lain in a dry creek bed while a column of the enemy passed within 30 meters, close enough that he heard them talking, close enough to smell their cigarettes, and he had lain across Delgado with his hand clamped over the boy's mouth because Delgado was delirious by then and trying to call for his mother, and he had pressed down and counted his own heartbeats and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in that the boy would not make a sound. He had held the muzzle of his rifle in the other hand, pointed at the column, and he had decided that if one of them turned his head, he would take as many as the 11 rounds allowed, and then it would be the knife. And he had been, in that moment, perfectly calm. calmer than he had ever been in a warm room in his life, because there was nothing left to decide. The column passed. Delgado lived, and some piece of Earl Whitmore stayed in that creek bed forever, the piece that could be afraid so that ever after, in any room, with any threat, there was a stillness in him that other men felt and could not place. He had left it in the creek bed, with the moon coming through in coins. The stillness was what came home in its place. When the helicopters finally came up over the trees in the gray dawn of the third day, he had 11 rounds left, and he had not slept, and he could not, for a moment, remember how to let go of Delgado's collar, his fingers having closed and locked around it, the way a man's hand closes on the only thing keeping him in the world. A year later, in a room full of marble and flags, a man had lowered a length of pale blue ribbon over his head, and the metal had hung cold against his chest, and he had thought, the whole time, only of the one he had left in the green. That was what the rosette meant. That was the blue. Not a story for a mess hall. A debt, worn quietly, paid forward by being kind to loud young fools, because somewhere a loud young fool's mother would want him to come home. In the present, his right hand lay flat and still on the steel table, the way it had lain flat and still on a dying man's chest. And he waited. Corporal Renner could not stand the waiting. He was 22, and the room had turned against him, and he did not understand why. And the not understanding was unbearable. And so he did the thing that young men do at the edge of a humiliation they cannot name. He tried to force the situation back into a shape he could win. He stepped around the sergeant major, a thing he would later not be able to explain, and he reached down and took the old man by the shoulder, by the soft, worn olive of the field jacket, and he gripped and pulled hard to haul him bodily up out of the seat. I said, "Stand!" The old man's hand came up off the table and closed around Renner's wrist. It was not violent. Witnesses would say afterward that the old man never rose from the bench, never raised his voice, that his face never changed. But Corporal Jace Renner, 22 years old, and in the prime physical condition of an infantry marine, found that his arm had simply stopped, as completely as if it had been set in concrete. The old man's fingers wrapped around his wrist, with a dry, absolute, unhurried strength that he could not break, and could not move, and could not, in that moment, entirely believe. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder, his whole young body behind it, and the old hand did not so much as tremble, and the pale gray eyes came up and met his, and held them, calm as still water. And for one long, terrible second, Corporal Renner understood all the way down that the strength in that grip was not the strength of an old man at all, that it was the worn-down remnant of something that had once been capable of things he did not have the imagination to picture, and that it was being given to him gently, as a message, at perhaps 1/10 of what it had been. Then the old man opened his hand and let go. He set Renner's wrist free as carefully as he had righted the coffee cup, and he folded his hand back over the other one, and he looked away, out toward the window and the gray morning light, as if nothing had happened, as if the boy were already forgiven. It is a strange thing to be shown your own measure. Renner had spent his short adult life certain of his body, certain that he was strong, that he was fast, that in any room the physical equation tilted his way, because it always had. He had never once met the edge of it. He met it now, holding his own wrist, in the grip of a man 4 times his age, and the meeting rearranged something in him that would not go back to the way it was. He had pulled with everything he had. The old man had not been holding him hard. That was the part that would keep him awake. The old man had been holding him the way you hold a door, so it doesn't slam, with a fraction, with a courtesy. And even that fraction had been a wall. Renner understood, dimly, the way you understand a language you don't speak, that he had been allowed to keep his dignity, that the old man could have taken it, could have taken a great deal more than that, and had instead chosen to give him a small private lesson that no one else in the room had even seen. And somehow, the mercy of it was more frightening than violence would have been, because violence he could have understood. This he could not. Renner staggered back a step, cradling the wrist, his breath gone short. The room was silent now, completely. Every table, the whole dining facility turned toward the corner without quite knowing why. Sowell had lowered the phone. Pratt had backed all the way to the wall. The staff sergeant by the window was standing at something that was almost, not quite, attention. Nobody had told them to. The body knows things before the mind does, and a room full of Marines had begun, without orders, without understanding, to feel the gravity of the man in the gas station jacket pull them upright. Into that silence, far off, came the sound of the double doors at the head of the dining facility opening, and boots on the tile, and a voice calling the room, and everything that had been gathering for the last 10 minutes arrived all at once. "Where is he?" The voice belonged to Major General Thomas Calder, 58 years old, the commanding general of the base, who had been pulled out of a briefing by a white-faced aide and had walked the last 40 yards. He came through the doors at a pace just short of a run, his service uniform crisp, 2 stars bright on each collar, and the entire dining facility came to its feet for him in a rolling wave, chairs scraping, benches knocking back, families half rising in confusion, because that is what a room does when a general enters it. But the general was not looking at the room. "Corporal," Doyle said, low and fast, "answer the general's question when he asks, and son, you give him your full attention." Calder crossed the floor, and Renner, on instinct, drew himself up and started to speak. "Sir, Corporal Renner, but the general went past him as if he were furniture, straight to the end of the farthest table, and there he stopped. He looked down at the old man for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, the same question the corporal had asked as a joke 10 minutes before, except that there was nothing in it now but a kind of awe. "Sir," General Calder said, "would you tell this corporal your rank?" The old man looked up at him. The pale eyes moved over the 2 stars, the crisp uniform, the young general's face, and something in them softened, one professional recognizing another across 40 years. "Sergeant Major," he said, "retired, 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company." A pause. Earl Whitmore. And Sergeant Major Doyle said the name aloud, to the room, in the voice that carries, "Sergeant Major Earl Whitmore, Medal of Honor, 1969. The words moved through the dining facility like a current through water. General Calder came to attention. Then, slowly, deliberately, in front of his entire base, the Major General raised his hand and rendered a salute to the old man in the worn field jacket, held it, crisp, unwavering, and said, "Sergeant Major Whitmore, I have read your citation every year since I was a 2nd lieutenant. There is a portrait of you in the foyer of my headquarters. Every Marine on this installation walks past your face on the way to work. It is the great honor of my career to finally shake your hand." And Corporal Jace Renner's face came apart in stages, the way a face does when the floor of the world drops out from under it. Confusion first, a blank not understanding. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. No, this is the old man, the Chow Hall grandpa. Then recognition, the slow horror as the words, Medal of Honor, and portrait, and every Marine walks past your face, arrange themselves into a single unbearable shape, and then a white, hollow terror as he understood, completely, what he had done, and to whom, and how many people had watched him do it. And then the room moved. It did not move on a command, because there was no command that covered it. It moved the way a tide moves, from the front tables outward, Marines coming to their feet and then to attention. Sailors and soldiers visiting for the day standing because the Marines were standing. Civilians rising because they could feel that something was being honored, even if they did not know its name. Mothers lifting children onto hips so they could see. A gunnery sergeant near the serving line was the first to bring his hand up in a salute, and then it spread, hand after hand, the whole dining facility filling with the small, sharp motion of it. 40, 60, 100 Marines holding a salute toward the corner table where the frail old man sat in his gas station jacket with a cup of cold coffee in front of him. Somewhere, a tray slid off a table and clattered on the tile, and no one so much as glanced at it. The serving line had gone still, the cooks in their whites standing in the pass-through with their ladles down. It was the loudest silence Sergeant Major Doyle had ever stood inside, and his own eyes were stinging, and he did not care who saw it. And beside him, a captain who had been complaining about a schedule 10 minutes ago was standing at rigid attention, with tears running openly down his face. All across the dining facility, the Marines were on their feet. Not for the general now, for the old man. And the only man in the room still seated was Sergeant Major Earl Whitmore, who looked at all of them standing, and looked tired, and looked as though he wished they would not. It moved fast after that, the way these things do once the truth is in the room. General Calder lowered his salute and shook the old man's hand in both of his. Then he turned, and the warmth went out of his face, and he looked at Corporal Renner, and the temperature of the room dropped 20 degrees. "Sergeant Major Doyle," he said. "Sir, this corporal is relieved. I want him out of my dining facility. I want a full account from every witness, and I want it on my desk before close of business. And I want him to understand, in detail, what he put his hands on today." Calder's voice was iron. "Corporal, you laid hands on a Medal of Honor recipient. You accused him of stealing valor, in front of families, in front of your Marines. There is no hole deep enough for what you are feeling right now, and you have earned every inch of it." Renner was the color of ash. "Sir, I didn't know." "No," Calder said. "You didn't. That's the whole of it, isn't it? You didn't know, so you decided he was nothing." He let that sit. A Marine treats the man in the worn-out jacket exactly the way he'd treat me. That's the entire point of the thing. You'll have a long time to learn it. And then the old man spoke. "General." Earl Whitmore had not raised his voice, but the room bent to hear it. He was looking at Renner, not with anger, with something more like recognition. An old man looking at a young fool and seeing, very clearly, 100 young fools he had known, most of whom had turned into good men, some of whom had not lived long enough to. "He's just a boy," Whitmore said, loud, stupid the way they're all stupid at that age. "I was worse." He turned his pale eyes on Renner. "Don't break him over it. Make him carry it. Let him learn it on his feet." A pause. "That's an old sergeant major's recommendation, sir, for whatever it's worth in your house." Calder looked at him a long moment, and then nodded once, the way you nod to a senior man whose judgment you would not dream of questioning. "Aye, Sergeant Major." And that, more than the salute, more than the standing room, was the thing the witnesses talked about afterward. That a 2-star general had taken a recommendation from a retired enlisted man without a flicker of hesitation, had said "A" to him, because some kinds of authority do not live on a collar. They could relieve the corporal. They could not give him what the old man had, and they all knew it. And the knowing was its own quiet sentence on the boy, harsher than any page in any regulation. Renner stood there in the wreck of the morning, and the worst of it was not the relief or the report or the long, ugly months he could see stretching ahead of him. The worst of it was that the old man had defended him. had spent his first words, after everything, asking that the boy not be broken. There is no punishment in the manual that lands like the mercy of the man you wronged, and Renner felt it land, and bowed his head, and for the first time all morning had nothing whatsoever to say. If this one reached something in you, that the proudest men are the quietest, and that we so rarely know the legend until we've already insulted him, then carry it forward. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this old man's story find the people who need to hear it. An hour later, the Family Day crowd was gone, and the base had gone quiet and gray under a low afternoon sky, and an old man in a worn field jacket stood alone in front of the long granite wall outside the headquarters, where the names of the fallen were cut into the stone. He found the one he was looking for near the top, where it had been for 57 years, and he raised one weathered hand and laid it flat against the cold granite over the name, the way he had once laid it flat against a dying man's chest in the green dark, and he stood there a long time and said nothing. He did not hear the young man come up behind him. But after a while, a quiet voice said, "Sergeant Major, I came to apologize. I'm not asking you to accept it. I needed to say it standing here." Earl Whitmore did not turn around. He kept his hand on the stone. After a moment, he said, "What's my name, Corporal? You asked me my rank a dozen times today. You never once asked me my name." He let the silence hold. A man's rank is what the Corps made him. His name is what his mother gave him and what his friends called him in the dark. The first one you can read off a collar. The second one you have to earn the right to know. He paused. You'll learn that. You've got time. That's the one thing I didn't have to spare, and you've got it by the truckload, and you were spending it being cruel to an old man in a chow hall. Spend it better. Renner's voice was unsteady. "Yes, Sergeant Major." "This one," Whitmore said, and tapped the granite once with 2 fingers, over a name near the top, worn smooth by 57 years of weather. His name was Daniel Hollis. He was 19. He went first, and he went fast, and he never knew what hit him, which is the only mercy in any of it. I couldn't reach him. I've stood at this kind of wall in a lot of towns, looking for his name because they put it on more than one. I read the names, all of them, when I can. Somebody has to. That's the whole job in the end. Not the medal, not the standing up, not any of what happened in there today. Just somebody, somewhere, still saying the names out loud so they were here. And he left his hand on the granite, and after a while the young man stepped up beside him, close, and read the name, and said it once, quietly, the way you say a thing you intend to keep. And the 2 of them stood together in the cold quiet, an old man and a young one, looking at the names. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.